They said he was just a name on the payroll, a stranger to the actual work, someone who would never understand what was really happening on the ground floor. What they didn't know was that he was sitting right there in the corner of the dining hall, wearing an old grey hoodie and a baseball cap pulled low, silent, listening, remembering. The first night of the Langbridge Learning Company retreat, once considered a model for innovative education, took place in the early winter chill of Aspen Ridge, Colorado. Snow blanketed the wooden eaves. Firelight flickered across faces tired from a long year. Nearly 100 employees sat around long pine tables, red wine swirling in glasses, laughter echoing off vaulted ceilings like those of a church. At the far end of the table, Peter Lang, the founder and CEO of Langbridge, sat like a shadow. No one recognized him. 3 weeks earlier, he had shaved his beard, changed his hairstyle, and signed up for the retreat under the alias Ben Matthews, tech assistant from the Montana branch. No cameras, no film crew. This wasn't a TV stunt like Undercover Boss. This was a personal quest, a quiet investigation of his own, to understand why something in the company his brainchild was beginning to fracture. Why were the reports on employee morale increasingly vague? Why were people who once gave everything suddenly leaving, without a word of complaint? And most painfully, why was he no longer sure this company still held its original soul? Peter chewed slowly on cold roast meat, his eyes scanning a lively group of employees chatting nearby. A tall, slick-haired man was speaking with smug satisfaction. "If it weren't for me, this place would have collapsed long ago. That cloud-sitting CEO is just a shadow. We're the ones keeping the wheels turning." Laughter erupted around the table. Not mocking laughter, agreeing laughter. Some even clinked glasses with him. Peter quickly identified the man from a folded note in his pocket. Lucas Brent, head of product strategy. But it wasn't Lucas's words that made Peter narrow his eyes. It was what came next, a soft comment from a young employee at the end of the table. "Honestly, if Linda quits, I'd probably hand in my notice too." Linda. Peter froze. Who was Linda? In over 20 years of management, no one by that name had ever appeared in an executive report or board meeting. No senior title, no spotlight. Yet the name Linda was spoken with reverence, almost like salvation. He exhaled gently, pulling a small, worn notebook from his jacket pocket. 3 neat words were scribbled inside, "Find Linda." Lucas had just given him the answer to who was speaking in the vacuum of a collapsed culture. But that young employee's remark revealed something far more important: who was truly holding the soul of Langbridge together. Peter lingered for a few more minutes, staring at the now cold plate of food in front of him, his mind ablaze. He didn't need a guide, just his ears, his eyes. And if Linda was indeed someone everyone trusted but no one officially acknowledged, then maybe the true leader of Langbridge had never sat at the top. And it was time he found her, before it was too late. Morning came slowly to the mountains of Aspen Ridge. Snow dusted the fir trees, and the air carried the bite of damp pine wood and frozen wind. The first footsteps creaked cautiously down the wooden lodge stairs. A coffee bell jingled in the main kitchen as sleepy murmurs floated out of the dorm rooms. Peter Lang had been up for hours. He sat on the back porch, a steaming mug of black coffee in hand, cap pulled low, facing the woods as if pondering something far away, or something very close. He hadn't dared name yet. Yesterday, when Lucas had mocked him loudly in front of nearly all the staff, it hadn't hurt as much as the nods of agreement around the table. It wasn't a punch. It was a fracture. A tiny crack deep enough to make Peter realize if he didn't act soon, Langbridge would no longer be Langbridge. On that day's handwritten schedule, one line in blue ink stood out: 9:30. Team challenge at the Lakeside Snow Camp. Peter gave a half smile. An activity labelled trust building, exactly what he was beginning to lose in his own system. As he walked the narrow trail toward the frozen lake, a group of employees had already gathered around gear bins, ropes, tarps, tent poles. They would split into teams and build shelters under harsh conditions. A simple game, but it revealed everything: who led with words, who led with action, and who just watched. Peter was assigned to Team Red. Coincidentally or fatefully, Lucas was there too. The tall man still carried the same boisterous energy as the night before. He clapped people on the back and announced loudly, "Listen! I led the Denver sales team to record numbers during a blizzard, setting up a tiny tent, child's play." A few staff members chuckled politely. Peter stepped back, observing. He wasn't hunting for Linda directly. Instead, he searched for the way people looked at someone. The space people made when a certain person walked by, not out of fear, but out of respect. And then he saw her. She emerged from behind a thicket, carrying a faded canvas bag and a small thermos, short and sturdy, with cropped graying hair, a plain wool coat with no brand tag. But her eyes that knew who was cold without asking, who needed help without speaking. The name tag pinned to her chest read Linda H. Peter held his breath, not because he had found her, but because of a strange sensation, as if he were meeting a fragment of the soul he once let slip away. Linda wasn't assigned to a team. She held no clipboard, gave no speeches. Yet, in 10 quiet minutes, she corrected a knot for the blue team, handed gloves to a young yellow team member, and stood in the wind to block the chill from a shivering boy who lacked proper layers. Peter watched, pretending to tie rope, his ears still catching Lucas droning on about Nordic wind-resistant tent strategies. But no one was listening. No one cared. Meanwhile, every small gesture from Linda, though silent, drew people toward her like a steady anchor in a swirling storm. By the end of the activity, Linda's team, the blue team, was the only one whose shelter stood firm against a sudden gust. Lucas offered excuses. These ropes were faulty. Peter said nothing. He only watched the quiet glances being exchanged. No one spoke out loud, but everyone knew who had truly led that day. And Linda, the middle-aged woman with no official title, simply smiled, folded the extra tarp, and packed it away as if someone might need it tomorrow. Peter slipped his notebook back into his pocket. Below the words, Find Linda. He added another line. She doesn't stand on a platform, but everyone stands around her. The afternoon drifted slowly through the retreat lodge. Wind swept between the pines, slipping through jackets and collars. Snow melted in speckled patches on the wooden stairs, leaving dark, wet trails like blurred ink on unwritten pages. Peter sat at a pinewood table in the main hall, a steaming mug of ginger tea in his hands. The questions circling his mind had shifted from "Who is she?" to "How did she endure so long without being officially acknowledged?" Linda sat across the room, kneeling to adjust a backpack zipper for a young woman he remembered as Abby. The girl looked new, a little timid, but as Linda leaned over and tied the knot, Abby's eyes lit up as if someone had handed her peace. No thank you was spoken. Linda gently patted her shoulder, then moved on to help another employee struggling with a jammed water boiler. Peter watched every move as if listening to a symphony without sheet music, yet every note landed perfectly. A group playing cards nearby spoke just loud enough for Peter to catch Linda. "I don't even know if she has an official role, but I swear I'll only quit after she does. Last time I missed a deadline, my boss tore into me. She was the only one who asked if something was wrong. Last month, she sat with me the whole night reading the same report. Didn't say a word. Just sat there. That was all I needed to get through it." Peter noticed something strange. They didn't speak of her with pity or even deep gratitude. They spoke as if Linda were part of their mental architecture, like a wall or a street lamp or something unnamed but always there. Even stranger in a company where official management always preached initiative and team spirit. The one woman with no title embodied all those things humbly, quietly, constantly. That night after dinner, Linda quietly picked up a cloth and began wiping the tables, even though staff had already cleaned. A colleague tapped her shoulder. "Linda, take a break. There's staff for that." She smiled, eyes squinting a bit under the warm yellow lights. "I'm cleaning for the staff, not the tables." Peter froze. That wasn't just a joke. It was a way of seeing the world. In every organization, there are those who carry silent responsibilities no one assigns. They don't need titles, don't demand rank. They don't climb the ladder, they become its foundation. Peter rose, walking slowly toward the corner where Linda was folding used placemats. He didn't speak right away, just watched for a moment, then asked softly, "Do you always do this kind of thing?" Linda looked up, eyes kind but clear. "I do what needs to be done, friend." Peter extended his hand. "I'm Ben, QA support from Montana." She shook his hand. Her palm was slightly calloused, but warm. "Linda, from whichever department people can't seem to remember anymore," she said with a soft chuckle. "Maybe that's a good thing." Peter chuckled along. "Maybe," he said, "but I think people remember you in a different way." Linda tilted her head slightly, squinting as if trying to gauge whether the man in front of her really was a new hire. But then she simply replied, "As long as they remember the good that was done. Does it matter who did it? Peter said nothing. In the dim light of the lodge lounge, for the first time, he, founder of a company valued at nearly $300 million, felt smaller than the woman standing before him. Not because she held more power, but because she had never needed any. And sometimes, the ones who don't need power are the very ones who deserve it most. Night fell quickly in the mountains. The space turned silent. Only the wind weaving through the tall trees and the soft crunch of snow landing on the wooden roof could be heard. The employees had gathered around a large campfire behind the main lodge, the flames dancing across weary but relaxed faces, as if they were finally able to exhale. Peter sat at the outer edge of the circle. His old hoodie let him blend in completely. No one recognized him as the founder of Langbridge. No one noticed the focus in his eyes, the gaze of someone who was observing, listening, and holding back emotion. In his hands was a mug of hot cocoa, so overloaded with cinnamon it burned his tongue. But he didn't care. Every sense was tuned into the conversations murmuring around him, especially the trio of young employees sitting closer to the fire. A girl with brown braided hair, a smiling dark-skinned young man, and a third person, tall and thin, mostly silent, only nodding when needed. The girl spoke first, just loud enough for him to hear. "Honestly, I was planning to quit earlier this year. Wrote my resignation email a few times." The guy next to her chuckled, though there was a bit of pain in his voice. "Only a few times. I had the whole letter drafted. If it weren't for Linda, I'd be long gone." The third one nodded softly. "Same here. Remember that Q1 meeting I got blamed for something I didn't do? Right in front of everyone. I wanted to walk out, but Linda came to me right after. Didn't ask questions, didn't judge, just handed me a water bottle and said, 'If you need silence, I'll sit next to you.'" Peter swallowed hard. His hand tightened slightly around his mug. None of these stories had ever appeared in any HR report. None recorded in board meetings. No KPI could measure what Linda had done. "She helped me fill out paperwork to take time off and care for my mum," the girl continued, her voice dropping. "No one else knew. She found the form herself, printed it out, and sat with me filling in every line." Peter suddenly remembered all the proposals he had approved in bulk, never once reading the names. In that moment, he felt like a king who hadn't stepped outside the palace in years, and the real world had moved on, waiting for no one. When the firelight lit up Linda's face, draping a wool scarf around the shoulders of the young girl curled up next to her, Peter realized some leaders never stand at the podium. But they are everywhere. People need them. She wasn't a savior. She was an anchor. Not someone who solved every problem, but someone who made others believe they wouldn't have to face them alone. The young employee's eyes turned toward Linda, the way one looks at a pillar, not a word spoken, but in the way they leaned toward her, in the way they looked at her. There was complete trust. Peter twirled his cocoa slowly, whispering to himself, "There are people no one calls leader, but they are the reason others don't give up, not far off." Lucas Brent was waving his hands and cracking jokes with another group, laughter echoing, but no one leaned on him. No one reached for him when it got cold. He could make people laugh. But Linda made them stay. Peter scanned the circle not to count staff, but to feel the pulse of a company soul he once thought he had lost. And for the first time in years, his chest tightened, not from anger, from regret. Why did it take pretending not to be himself to finally see the truth? Linda turned and caught his gaze. Her eyes weren't suspicious, weren't probing, just caring, as if to ask, "Are you cold?" Peter gave a small nod, then looked away. He couldn't let her know who he was, not yet, but inside, he thought, if Langbridge is still standing, it's because someone like her has been holding it up with her heart. Late at night, the wind hummed softly through the wooden slats. Inside a small library room rarely visited, Peter sat alone at a long table dusted by time. The room smelled of old paper, worn leather chairs, and the ticking of a grandfather clock like a reminder to someone who had forgotten who they once were. A dim yellow light cast shadows on Peter's cheek as he browsed his personal laptop, the only device he brought besides his phone. On screen was an old internal Langbridge directory, a forgotten folder titled 10-Year Anniversary. He was looking for something, or maybe waiting for something to find him. And then he saw it. A faded photo, low resolution. The colors yellowed like anything touched by time. But in the picture, he immediately recognized his mother, Eleanor Lang, co-founder of Langbridge, standing on stage, her hand resting on a commemorative plaque. She was smiling, not a photo op smile, but the smile of someone who knew she was doing the right thing. Beside her stood a middle-aged woman with familiar eyes, no makeup, no expensive blazer, but a quiet strength Peter now recognized instantly. Linda. Caption beneath the photo, Mrs. Eleanor Lang and longtime associate Linda Harrow, receiving the Core Values Award, 2006. Peter sat still. His heartbeat slowed. Linda had been there from the very beginning, not a recent rising employee. She was part of Langbridge history, a piece of the story he had lost in his pursuit of power and accolades. He opened more files, a 2008 program report, signed by Linda under Community Outreach Coordinator, a 2010 year-end celebration list of unofficial honorees, her name at the top. A short, handwritten note from his mother. Linda holds the core of this company, not with words, but with presence. Whoever leads after me, I hope they see that too. Peter could no longer hold back his emotions. In his mind, a faded memory echoed a day long ago, when he was a young intern at his mother's company. He recalled a woman bending down to pick up a box he'd dropped in the elevator. She smiled and said, "Careful there." Young Mr. Lang, back then. He had nodded vaguely, assuming she was some admin staff. Now he knew that was Linda. Perhaps his mother had known the day would come when numbers would blind him. Perhaps she left Linda behind, not just for the company, but for its conscience. Peter opened his phone, tapped into his encrypted notes, and typed 4 short lines. She was there when I wasn't looking. She stayed when I walked away. She held firm when I cracked. She stayed loyal even when I didn't deserve it. Outside the window, snow began to fall again softly, like his own heart. No more reports needed, no more meetings, no more reasons. Peter had found the one person who still carried the soul of the company he had once let slip through his fingers. The next morning was clear but bitterly cold. Ice had begun to form along the wooden stairs, and thin veils of fog drifted among the branches, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Peter stood at the edge of the training field, where employees were gathering for the obstacle challenge activity. Wooden crates, ropes, helmets, flags, and markers were laid out like a miniature army course. Part of him hoped the day would be calm. The rest, the part that was growing louder, knew something was about to break. Team Red was grouped together again. Of course, Lucas Brent resumed his self-appointed role as commander. Linda stood a few steps away, tightening the safety harness of a petite girl who feared heights. No one assigned her to guide, but no one stopped her either. Her presence, as always, required no permission, only participation. The game began. Each team had to build a 3-tier tower using crates, then raise a flag at the top without toppling it. Lucas barked orders, buzzing about center-of-gravity strategies. Peter pretended to listen, but his eyes stayed on Linda, who was at the far corner adjusting a loose rope, one that could have tilted the entire structure if left unchecked. Lucas didn't notice, but Peter did. And then the inevitable happened. Just minutes before Team Red was about to finish, the whole tower wobbled violently. A soft crack echoed. Panic flared. Linda stepped in calmly, adjusted the support rope at the right corner, her hands moving with the precision of an engineer. The tower stabilized just in time. Team Red didn't win, but it didn't collapse. Until Lucas realized who had adjusted the rope. "Wait a second," he said loudly, slicing through the air. "Who gave her permission to touch the structure?" Everyone turned. Linda still stood there, unshaken. "I just saw the rope was loose. It was about to fall. That wasn't your part. We have a team. We have a commander. You interfered without going through anyone." Lucas's voice grew cold, each word emphasized as if he were building a courtroom case. Some employees glanced at one another. A few looked confused. Others looked down. But no one spoke up. Peter clenched his hand inside his coat pocket. His eyes scanned the crowd, searching for a flicker of courage. But instead, he saw silence. "You do this often, don't you?" Lucas continued, eyes narrowed. "Thinking you have the right to fix everything. But when something goes wrong, who takes responsibility? Not you." Linda looked straight at him, her voice calm and even. "Helping isn't a habit. It's a reflex. I saw it was about to collapse, and I did what I always do, make sure no one gets hurt." Lucas scoffed and turned to the rest, like he was rallying support. "You hear that? The great savior of Langbridge shows up again, but nobody ever elected her to lead, right?" Peter couldn't hear clearly anymore. Everything in his head went blurry, as if he were watching a replay of everything broken in the culture he himself had let drift off course, the loudest voices taking the stage. while the quiet ones were pushed into the shadows. Linda didn't argue. She simply said one line. "Soft as the wind, I won't join the next round. Not because I'm afraid, but because no one needs me in this game." She walked slowly to the sidelines, not lowering her head, not angry. But Peter knew something inside her had cracked. Not because she was insulted, but because she had been ignored by the entire system. He looked around. No one stopped Lucas. No one said, "That's enough." Not a single voice stood up for her. And in that moment, Peter understood what exhausted Linda wasn't pressure. It was the silence of those who knew the truth, but wouldn't speak. Peter didn't step forward, not because he was scared, but because he couldn't yet. It wasn't time, because before he spoke, he needed everything to break completely. Not the rope or the tower, but a culture that had forgotten what truly makes people stay. That night, Peter Lang didn't sleep. He sat alone in the small room, yellow light casting shadows across a table scattered with documents. In his hand was his phone, displaying a special encrypted app, one that only a few in the company even knew existed. And in the stillness of the retreat night, he did something no CEO should do, but a father would. He decided to place his trust again. With just a few command lines, he sent out a simulated signal: company data breach detected, full system under attack, urgent verification required. It wasn't a prank, it was a test. Because sometimes you can't see someone's true nature until panic sets in. 6:12 a.m. An alert lit up on every employee's phone. Alert. Unusual login activity detected. Langbridge learning system may be compromised. Please refrain from accessing accounts until further notice. Within 3 minutes, the retreat hallways buzzed with whispers, concern, and confusion. Employees who had just woken up blinked at their phones, eyes wide, scrolling rapidly as if searching for answers. Peter sat quietly in the corner, observing like a ghost. Some blamed the network, others assumed it was a common glitch. But then, as if scripted, the loudest voice rang out. Everyone calm down. Lucas Brent, wearing his coat draped over his shoulders, stepped into the center of the room. This happened last year too, probably just another false alarm. Don't overreact. Just wait for it to confirm. A few reluctant nods, some awkward chuckles, but many eyes still exchanged worried looks. And then a different voice spoke, low, calm, but firm. "I'll double-check with the tech team. Might ask someone from internal systems to verify the data structure." Linda. She sat quietly at a corner computer station, fingers flying across the keyboard like someone who knew the system intimately. She didn't ask permission, didn't report, didn't wait. She simply acted like always. A few staff glanced her way. One asked gently, "Were you ever in the IT department?" Linda didn't take her eyes off the screen. "No, but I helped restore the system during the 2015 crash. The emergency protocols are still the same." Peter furrowed his brow. He had even forgotten there was a crash back in 2015. Within 10 minutes, Linda had connected with a senior IT staffer through a backup network. She guided the team to disable auto-sync, shift to manual authentication, and send out internal alerts through a secure channel. No raised voices, no authority granted. Meanwhile, Lucas stood before his small group, still acting like a broadcaster. "Relax, I bet it's nothing. And even if it is, it's not our job. That's its problem." Peter curled his lip. That exact line. Not our job was what had killed the culture of accountability in his company for years. Linda didn't argue. She just kept working. While doing so, she quietly reassured some panicking staff beside her. "No need to worry. I'll have someone reset the identity verification system. No data has been exposed yet. We can stop this before it gets worse." Within 20 minutes, the situation was fully under control. Even Peter, the one who staged the crisis, was stunned at how quickly she responded. And the strangest thing, no one clapped, no one cheered, no one said thank you aloud, but everyone looked at her with quiet, resolute trust. Lucas slowly backed away. In his eyes was a dawning realization that whatever invisible power he thought he had, someone had just taken it, without saying a word. Peter slipped his phone back into his pocket. In his mind, a single line echoed. "Only when the storm hits, do you learn who's holding the boat steady." That afternoon, after the simulated storm had passed, snow began to fall again, not in a rush, but softly, drifting down on people's shoulders like nature whispering, "Slow down." Peter walked the stone trail that wound into the pine forest behind the lodge. The tall trees on both sides stood still, as if guarding secrets of their own. Beneath his boots, the thin snow crunched with brittle snaps, but inside, it wasn't the snow that was breaking. It was the definition of leader he once believed in. Soon, he spotted Linda. She was ahead of him, her thick coat dusted with fresh snow, her figure slightly hunched, her steps slow but firm. Slung over her shoulder was the familiar faded canvas bag, the corner of a wrinkled folder, and an old thermos peeking out. For reasons he couldn't explain, Peter quickened his pace. "Hi there," he said, still using the low voice of Ben from Montana. "Mind if I walk with you for a bit?" Linda turned. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't cautious. She simply nodded. "I don't mind, but it's a bit slippery." They walked side by side, no words at first, just wind rustling through branches and the synchronized rhythm of their steps on snow. Peter spoke first. "You did really well this morning." Linda smiled softly, eyes forward. "Wasn't a big deal. I just did what needed doing, but you weren't required to. You're not tech, not management, no assigned responsibility." Linda paused a beat, then answered, "I don't need to be assigned. I saw fear, and I was afraid that if I didn't act, someone would get hurt." Peter was quiet. A gust of wind blew dry leaves across their path. "Have you ever thought about leaving Langbridge?" he asked. The question came not from Ben, but from Peter Lang himself, though he still hadn't revealed it. Linda stopped. She didn't look away, didn't look at him either. She stared at the bare treetops in the distance many times. "But I made a promise to someone." Peter asked softly, "What promise?" "That I'd stay as long as someone in this company still held on to its core values, even if it's just one person." Peter swallowed hard. That line, the same one his mother used to handwrite at the end of every email, was now spoken not by an executive, but by a guardian. That person was my mother. "Wasn't it?" he asked, revealing a shard of truth for the first time. Linda wasn't surprised. She turned and truly looked at him with no blame, no suspicion, only gentle confirmation. "I knew you weren't new from day one." Peter chuckled, a little sheepish. "I guess I'm not great at pretending." "No, you're decent." "But your eyes, they're the eyes of someone searching for something lost. Only those who've been lost before have eyes like that, for some reason." Those words made Peter want to stop walking, to sit down in the snow and apologize like a child who just broke his mother's favorite teapot. Linda kept walking, slowly. Every company changes, every culture shifts. But if no one keeps the fire, it'll go dark eventually. And you've kept it going for over 20 years. Not because I'm noble." Linda interrupted, voice slightly shaking from the cold, "but because I didn't want anyone else to feel abandoned in a place that once called itself family." Peter clenched his hands inside his coat pockets. He felt ashamed, not for pretending, but for letting Linda carry everything, in silence. No badge, no awards, never once on stage. Only once in her life had she been named beside his mother, and then slowly pushed out of the spotlight like an old shadow. "I used to think I built Langbridge," Peter said, voice like a breath, a confession. "But maybe I only built the shell. You kept the soul." Linda didn't answer, but her face softened as if, finally, after all these years, someone truly saw her. The final day of the retreat began under a grey sky and strong winds, as if even the weather sensed the pressure simmering beneath the surface. In the training yard behind the lodge, new obstacles had been set up: slippery wooden ramps, rope swings over snowy patches, and finally, the flag tower, where teams had to raise a pole and plant their flag within a time limit. A coordination challenge. But Peter knew today, no one cared about technique. Today was the day something would explode. Linda didn't sign up for the challenge. She stood quietly on the edge of the field, arms crossed, watching Team Red, Peter's team, and Lucas's. Just like the previous days, Lucas stepped forward, rallying the group with overblown military-like enthusiasm. He ordered everyone to pull ropes, push crates, climb the pole. Everything looked by the book, but it reeked of performance. Peter followed in silence, but his eyes stayed on Linda. She was assisting the blue team nearby, checking a knot for a young employee and handing him her gloves. As always, she didn't need a title to be allowed to act. Everything was going normally, until Team Red's anchoring rope slipped. The flagpole tilted hard to one side, threatening to collapse onto the team beside them. A few screams rang out. Without waiting for instructions, Linda ran over. She crouched down, realigned the ropes diagonally, drove the stake deep into the snow, and tied the locking knot as if she had trained in the military. The pole stabilized, disaster averted, and that was when the real storm began. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Lucas's voice hit the air like a slap. He stormed over, face flushed red. "Who gave you permission to interfere? This is my team. You're not even supposed to be here." Everyone froze. Buckets, stakes, and ropes clattered to the ground. Some turned away. Others looked down at the snow. No one said a word. Linda stood up, her gaze calm. The pole was going to fall. I didn't think anyone wanted to get hurt. "That's irrelevant," Lucas shouted. "You always butt in, always doing things no one asked for. Who do you think you are? You have no title, no role in the organizing team. You're just a shadow hanging around." The air went still. Peter clenched his fists in his coat pockets. Veins pulsed at his neck. Linda didn't back down. She didn't defend, didn't attack. She just said one sentence, quiet but sharp enough to silence the field. "I don't need to be asked to stop something bad from happening." Lucas stepped closer, now just feet away. "It's people like you that make it impossible for anyone to lead. You mess everything up and always want recognition. But the truth is, no one needs you." His words hit the snow like a sword. Linda paused for a beat. Then she spoke, softly but loud enough for all to hear. "I never asked for recognition. I just hoped someone else might also notice and act before someone gets hurt." She turned and walked away, not running, not surrendering, just quietly leaving the field behind a crowd with their heads down, and one man left standing in the echo of his own voice. Peter didn't follow. He couldn't, because he knew if he stepped in now, it would seem emotional. Just another case of defending the weak on the playground. He needed the truth to speak for itself so no one could deny it anymore. But inside, one thing had become painfully clear. Langbridge wasn't threatened by competitors out there, but by what was rotting from within, where the hero was called a shadow, and the obstacle was celebrated. A cold wind swept the field, carrying the scent of plastic stakes and human sweat, and in that gust, Peter clearly heard one of his mother's old sayings in his mind when the storm comes. Don't look at who shouts the loudest. Look at who stands the firmest. The next morning, the air in the main hall felt heavy. Even though the fireplace glowed red, the remaining employees sat scattered across wooden benches, clutching paper coffee cups, eyes tired and unfocused. Everyone expected the closing ceremony to go as usual, a few wrap-up words, some small games, then the buses out of the retreat. But this morning, something was different. On the makeshift stage, the facilitator held a microphone, her gaze shifting slightly to the back row. "Before we end, we have a special guest. Or more accurately, someone who's been with us all along without anyone knowing the truth." A few people stretched their necks. Some frowned in confusion. Peter Lang stood up. He no longer wore a grey hoodie or baseball cap. Today, he had on a simple charcoal turtleneck, neat, calm, no suit, no tie, no CEO badge. He stepped onto the stage and paused at the mic. He looked out over the room, letting a few seconds pass in silence. Dozens of eyes fixed on him, surprised, puzzled, stunned. "Good morning," he began, voice low and steady. "I know, these past few days. You've known me as Ben Matthews from Montana, but my name isn't Ben." He paused, then said clearly, "I'm Peter Lang, founder of Langbridge." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Chairs creaked. Someone dropped a coffee spoon, and in the far left corner, Linda, who was organizing folders, froze for a moment, but didn't turn her head. "I didn't come here to evaluate anyone." Peter continued, "I came because I felt. I no longer understood the company I created." He clicked a remote. The big screen behind him lit up, not with charts, but with a short video compiled from security footage during the retreat. Lucas mocking people during the fake system breach. Linda tying safety ropes, sharing blankets, guiding the IT team during the fake alert. And finally, the moment she was publicly berated by Lucas, while everyone stayed silent. The room fell still. Peter took a deep breath. "I used to think that to lead well, all I needed were talented people, clean reports, and clear goals. I was wrong." He looked toward the front row, where Linda sat, hands still gripping the folders in her lap. Her eyes didn't reject him, but they didn't expect anything either. She had grown used to being forgotten. "We cannot run this company without people like Linda Harrow. She has no title, no badge, no authority. But she has something I and many of us once lost: unconditional kindness, responsibility without appointment, and strength not from speaking, but from quiet action." Linda looked up. "She is the only one who preserved the soul of Langbridge through all the years we chased metrics. And I owe her an apology. Not just for not seeing it sooner, but for letting silence surround her for so long." Someone sniffled in the back row. A young woman bowed her head, wiping tears. Peter turned to everyone, then looked at Linda. "Ms. Linda, I don't know if I even deserve to ask you to stay. But I know if this company still has hope, it's because of people like you." Linda rose, quietly, her arms at her sides. Her face calm, not overly emotional, but in her eyes was a light, the kind that glows when someone is finally truly seen. After years spent as a blurry figure in the background, the room erupted in applause, not for a title, but for justice, long overdue. 2 days later, it was still cold, but for the first time in years, something warm flickered inside Peter Lang like a small flame in his mother's old kitchen, slow and deep in the chest. He waited in the 11th floor lobby of Langbridge headquarters, where the grey-blue carpet muffled every sound, and even a pen scribble could be heard from downstairs. The elevator dinged softly. The doors opened. Linda Harrow stepped out, wearing a light brown wool coat, a simple grey scarf, and her old canvas bag. She hesitated at the door with the brand-new nameplate, Linda Harrow, Vice President of Culture and Core Values. Peter smiled and held out his hand. I don't call this a promotion. I call it a correction. Linda looked at the nameplate, then at him, her eyes quiet but deep. You know I'm not good at office politics. I don't want you to be. I want you to be exactly what you've always been, the one who listens when no one wants to talk, who sees when others look away. They stepped into the office. No giant desk, no leather chair, just 2 seats at the same height, a small table with a vase of fresh flowers, and a brand new bookshelf still empty. Linda touched the edge of a chair, as if checking if it was real or to make sure she wasn't dreaming. I don't need a tall chair, but I need space to do the right thing. Peter nodded. You'll have full authority to build an internal mentoring system, introduce anonymous feedback sessions, and launch the one-day undercover initiative each quarter. A leader will work as a frontline employee. Linda turned to him, her eyes lighting up. You think the board will agree? I don't need them to agree. I need them to feel stirred. They both sat down. A quiet moment passed. Peter picked up a teacup, gazing out the tall window. You know, what stayed with me most during that retreat wasn't Lucas's insults. It was when you said, people stay silent until everything breaks. Because I've seen it. Too many times. Peter gripped the cup tightly. I thought I was leading, but I was just steering a pilotless ship, no one at the helm, only chasing destinations. You didn't steer, but you kept people from falling overboard. Linda looked at him for a long time, then nodded. I once promised your mother I wouldn't let Langbridge become a cold place, and you kept that promise even when I didn't. Outside, the sun began to break through. The first beams slipped through the glass, painting 2 side-by-side shadows on the floor. No one stood above the other anymore. Just 2 people, one who founded, one who kept the soul alive. Peter stood, walked toward the door, then paused. I don't know if I can change everything quickly, Linda, but I promise I'll start by not staying silent anymore. Linda smiled for the first time in years, not out of politeness, but from the heart. I never wanted people to know my name. I just wanted, when they looked around, they'd know someone was still keeping the fire alive. 1 week after the retreat, Langbridge wasn't the same. Not because the lobby was repainted or new slogans appeared on the walls, but because something had changed in the eyes of those who once felt like the background. Peter Lang no longer worked from the CEO suite. He moved his office to the 4th floor among product development, HR, and tech support. He launched a new initiative called Project Second Look every quarter. Senior leaders would spend 1 week working anonymously with frontline staff. No more leather chairs. No more meetings stacked hour by hour. Only listening. Linda Harrow sat in her new office, not grand, but warm. She hung an old photo of herself with Eleanor Lang, the founder, on the wall. Beneath it, a handwritten quote read, "True values don't need to be shouted, they just need to be lived." She began hosting quiet hours. Any employee could walk in, no reason needed, no appointment, just to sit with someone who understood. And something miraculous happened little by little. People who never spoke began to speak. Those who were never heard began to share. One Wednesday morning, in the shared break room, a young Asian employee named May timidly asked Linda, "Did you ever think of quitting?" Linda was pouring tea. She paused, smiled, many times. But every time I did, I asked myself, if I leave, who will stay for those no one sees? May nodded, eyes wet. I used to think the same, but I stayed because I saw you always stay. Peter strolled through the headquarters hallway. A maintenance worker waved at him, something that never happened years ago. He felt something strange inside. He was no longer the center, but he was exactly where he needed to be. Passing the executive boardroom, he stopped. Inside, Linda was speaking with 6 department heads. No PowerPoint, no diagrams, just real conversation. Don't wait for a crisis to find out who's trustworthy. Let them know on ordinary days that their quiet strength is irreplaceable. At month's end, Langbridge launched a new recognition program, not based on revenue, not on metrics, but on silent impact, where employees could nominate someone who helped them through a hard moment, even if it was just a word, a hug, or a small gesture. The first nominee, Linda; the second, a security guard who walked a terrified intern home late at night; the third, a technician who brought lunch to a co-worker watching over a sick child. And just like that, the culture changed, not through slogans, but through people. And at the end of that journey, Peter Lang realized he didn't need to be the founding CEO to be remembered. Just someone who thought he knew everything, then sat down and learned again, beside those who never asked for a spotlight. At a year-end press conference, a reporter asked him, "Do you think you found a new formula for success?" Peter looked into the lens, smiling. "I didn't find a formula. I just stopped long enough to realize. The one who's kept the fire alive all this time never once asked for a spotlight. And if you're watching this story, maybe you've been the one not mentioned in meetings, the one who does the small things without thanks, the one who stayed not for the paycheck, but for something deeper. Know this, you are not invisible. Someone sees you, and somewhere, someday, at the right moment, the light will fall on you, not because you demanded it, but because you deserve it."